Welcome back, everyone, to the Canadian Baseball Network podcast, another college series episode. Today, we're joined by the head coach at Illinois State University, Steve Holm. Steve, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you guys?
I'm good. I feel like we've gone back and forth a little bit on X and whatnot, but we've never had the opportunity to meet kind of face to face, so it's nice to finally do that.
Correct.
I guess I do want to talk about the upcoming season, obviously, but there's been some news recently about a Canadian in your program. Daniel Carinci has been kind of promoted to a full-time assistant. Can you just talk a little bit about what went into that decision and kind of what he brings to the program?
Well, we had one of our coaches left at break, went to Iowa. There's obviously been a ton of guys going to pro ball, and that usually causes some sort of waterfall. And so we lose him, and you're looking at your staff, and Daniel had come in to be our ops guy because being with Canadian status, we couldn't hire him per se as a paid coach, so he had to be a student in order to kind of keep his visa going. So you could tell that he had already coached, that was apparent, and he was doing a great job as the ops guy. And our guy leaves at the break, and at that point you're sitting there like, we're not at LSU here where we're just going to be able to, throw a lot of dollars at somebody and figure out, and steal somebody with experience. So you start kind of, doing your homework. And you're like, probably what's available is a young guy.
Yeah.
And we already have a young guy who we love. So there's no point in even asking, other people and talking to them. So, I didn't interview anybody. I just understood kind of the situation we were going to be in at that time of the year. I thought we had a good thing going with our culture and all that stuff. I didn't want to just bring in some random person that was going to possibly disrupt that. So, and I love the young guy that we already had. And it was kind of an easy gig for me. I just called him and said, hey, I think you just lucked out and became a coach and walked into a good situation. So he still has to go to school and all of that stuff, and he's getting his master's and everything, but he's on the field and he's coaching, and our players are better for it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of sometimes how it happens, right? Right place, right time.
Yep.
So it's good to see a Canadian kind of fall into that situation. But what does he kind of bring as a coach? You said you were really happy with him in the baseball ops role. What does he bring now to the field?
He brings a lot of energy. He's very, very outgoing. Personality wise, he balances well with our staff. We did we did personality assessments and stuff in the fall. Think kind of like a disc assessment idea. And, it was a good mix, because you don't want everyone to be the same. And he's definitely a little different than I am on those assessments and things like that. So that was a good mix. But he's also very, if you want to call it new school, like he's into numbers and stats and stuff. And I'm secretly into numbers, but I don't necessarily let everyone know that. But ultimately, he's really into numbers. I'm a little bit more into older numbers that I understand a little bit easier than all the ones with X and divided by and pluses and all that. But he's good with that, and he likes to explain it and help us out with things that are trending. And sometimes I just tell him, I said, that's a stupid stat, don't bring that one back to me. But sometimes there's some merit. So I think he's a good mix of old school, extremely hardworking, high energy, and then he's got some new school numbers and things like that.
That's interesting. Is there a benefit? To kind of talk a little bit about the benefit as a head coach to have a guy that's wasn't all that long ago was playing college baseball. What kind of asset is that as a head coach?
The longer you coach, obviously, the further away you get from your playing career. My first job, I had walked right off the field and started coaching, and you are probably able to be identified easier with them than you are the longer you coach. The game has certainly changed. I think everybody that is around the game understands that it has. Some people admit that, some people don't, but it definitely has changed. And I think the younger assistants are probably a better bridge to that. Most of the time when you talk to coaches, even the younger guys that just come off the field, they get into the coaching side and they're pretty quick to go, oh, it hasn't changed as much as I thought it was as a player, But I think you still need that bridge and I think that's where the younger guys are really good at. They understand what they're going through, but they understand what we're going through on the coaching side. And, I think it helps to bridge that gap.
Let's talk a little bit about the upcoming season. We're now just a couple weeks away from opening day. What does preparation look like at Illinois State in these final few weeks before first pitch?
So we're basically going Friday, Saturday, Sunday inter squads. We're off on Monday to mimic the season, and obviously that revolves around getting our pitchers onto their 7-day plan coming up. So we'll practice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday under traditional baseball practice idea, and then inter squads on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The pitchers are getting built up. Last week they were all 2 innings. This weekend, the main guys will go to 3, and then they'll go to 4, and they'll go to 5, and then the relievers will start bouncing back next week. The 1 inning guys will maybe throw a Friday and a Sunday or something like that. So you're trying to give them a little bit of what might occur and get them prepped for that. Position players last week, NCAA changed the rules, so we were allowed a 4th weekend, which to get ready. So last weekend was a week of inter squads that we didn't normally have. So I told the guys that if I see you running too hard, I'm going to call you out. Not too often does a coach say, I don't want you to run hard, right? But, you're 4 weeks before the season. Guys are home for Christmas break. You're trying to manage 35, 37 guys, and there's no way that they've all done their sprints, right? And so as a coach, at that point, you're like, I would much rather, have you run a little bit slower in that week and keep you healthy, and we'll just kind of progress just like you would with the pitchers, right? You wouldn't ask them to throw 5 innings. I did not ask our guys to jailbreak a ground ball to short and see if they can beat it out. So, we're trying to kind of build that momentum, and that's one of the ways that we've done it is, we still played our inner squad, but we just played it firmly as opposed to just all out. Now this weekend, I expect them to, be able to run that ground ball out and stuff like that. But they've been on campus for a couple weeks now, and their legs are in better shape.
For sure, yeah, it's interesting. That's definitely interesting. You don't want to run it quite as hard at the beginning, which obviously makes sense. You want to build a progression and get guys ready and healthy for the season. Are there certain guys that are like you got to really pull them back and be like, this is an opening day. You got to just chill out here a little bit?
Yeah, I mean they're like goldfish. Some of them are guys, right? They'll just eat. Like a goldfish will just eat till it pops. They will just run and work out and lift, and those are the best players. The guys that you got to pull the reins back, those are your best guys. But at the same time, you can't get your best guys hurt. In a situation where it's probably pretty early for them to be running hard. Now we also have the advantage of we're playing indoors. We have a big indoor practice facility that is the size of a football field, so it's 75. And so I feel a little bit better about them running in 75 than I would outside at in 30s. But ultimately, you're still having to. Those are the guys that you're trying to monitor. Is make sure that those gung-ho guys don't just, go out there and go before they're ready.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about Carinci. I want to talk about the 3 Canadians on your roster heading into the season. You just give us a little bit of a scouting report and kind of where they're at leading up to opening day. First one will be infielder Eric Machej. Can you just kind of talk a little about him, what he brings, and kind of your expectation?
Machej was probably our best recruit in that class. That was what they graduated in 24, I guess. So, this is his second year on campus. We had high expectations for him. He played opening day. We gave him an opportunity. He turned into a freshman at a certain point, a couple of weeks in. Eyes are big, and game going pretty fast for him. And we know what we have in him. We definitely try to get our freshmen. If we can get them 50 plus at bats or play appearances, however you want to look at it, we feel like they're in line to have a good sophomore year. Obviously, college baseball has changed with the age that's on the field. The portals allowed that to happen. And with that, a 23-year-old is usually better than a top-notch 18-year-old recruit, right? So in Machej's case, we got him out there. He started games. He played games. He struggled. He did well. He's kind of had that feel for college baseball. He got a chance to go home in summer ball. And, now he's going to get an opportunity to, really impact the team here going forward. He's got to, obviously every player in our program has to earn it, but he's going to get a chance to get out there early on in the season and see how it goes. And but he can really play. Like he's more of a instinctive player than he is a tools guy, if that makes sense. So his baseball brain is elite, and I think he helps you win.
How much harder is it for freshmen, not to go off track too much, but how much harder is it for freshmen these days to kind of come in and make that immediate impact given kind of the landscape of college baseball right now?
Well, I think if you look at it in the way that the kids that are coming to us, they've all played, 15U to 16U to 17U, and they show up and we're at 23U and they're 18. And the difference between 18 and 23 is drastic, both physically, because everybody talks about that. I've seen other podcasts and stuff. And they're like, oh, you got to be physical. But really the emotional maturity between a 23-year-old and an 18-year-old is even more drastic than the physicality. And don't get me wrong. I mean, like, we want our guys to be physical. We work out really hard. But the emotional maturity between a 23-year-old and 18 is just, it's so different, and what speeds up a 18-year-old doesn't even, affect the 23-year-old guy. So with that, I think that's a huge part for these guys is they don't understand that side of it. They all come, usually you've been the best player on your team, right? Otherwise you're not getting recruited into college baseball, and you're no longer the best player. That's one thing we say to all of our recruits when they sit in the office. I'm like, at some point you're going to be our worst player on the field, and it's probably going to happen in the fall if you're a freshman. And so, you're going to have to call home, and your parents are going to say, hey, how's it going? And at some point you're going to be, I'm the worst player in the program right now. And with that's okay, but you got to have your foundation, and our foundation for our guys is, working their butt off in the weight room, going to class, making sure that they're achieving what they're supposed to on that side, being a good person, and then showing up on the baseball field and working hard, but if you don't do those first three things, that baseball, that it's gonna get you, and you want that moment when you're feeling like you're the worst player to be a slump, not who you are. Because if you're not going to class, you're not being a good kid, and you're not working in the weight room, that it's not a slump. That's just who you are, and that's the part that we got to get through their heads.
Yeah, you brought back some memories there. I played at West Alabama. I remember my first fall, and it was like, what the hell am I doing here? Do I even know how to play baseball?
Yeah, it's tough, and you're, the Canadian kids are, it's even harder for them because you're not only are you from a long ways away, but you're in a different country, different country, different culture. All of those things are, those are real too, and for an 18-year-old kid to go to a different country and be all by himself because of baseball. And then baseball's like, now he's the worst baseball player he's ever been, that takes some heart to pull yourself out of that.
For sure. We're a little older, so we can laugh, because I always look back and say, if I could just go back now with the mindset I have now, I would have been one of the best players as a freshman. But I guess
correct. 23U. That's the point of it.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about right-handed pitcher Matthew Donnison. Kind of, what's kind of your expectation? Where's he at leading into the season?
Donnie will have a huge role for us. This is probably his last year of college baseball. I would imagine he's playing pro ball by, I guess July nowadays with the draft. He's an interesting metric guy. Like, there's a lot of vertical carry. He's got a 12-6 breaking ball, so he really can kind of play north-south plus minus, because the fastball running up there, fours and touch of five here and there, and then the breaking ball, obviously being a 12-6, is not super hard, so they gotta weight back on that. Developing a changeup, he is for the moment that he got onto our campus, I've trusted him in a game, which is not necessarily what most coaches say about young guys, right? His first fall, we were playing a game, so it's like, let's say it's October or something like that, and it just starts raining, and it wasn't supposed to rain, in our fall. Otherwise, we probably don't start the day, right? And coaches are looking over like, hey, and it starts pouring, and he's pitching, and they're looking like, are you going to call it? And I was like, you know what? I'm kind of interested to see what he does here. Like, and it's like the rain where you're slipping on the mound and stuff, and he's just grabbing the ball and just keeps going. I mean, some of them are slipping out of his hand. Obviously, he's not looking over in the dugout like, "Hey, you gonna call this?" He just keeps grabbing it. And I vividly remember that moment. And I told him later on that day, I was like, "Hey, that moment is going to help define you. Like, you, at no point did you decide to back off. You just kept letting it rip, even when the ball was squirting out of your hand. But you kept competing." And I said, "I'll remember that." And then his freshman year, like, we were we were pretty light in the bullpen, and he was in a role that he probably, shouldn't be on at that point in his career. He certainly wouldn't be on that role on this team with what we have now in the bullpen, but we threw him in the fire, and he had some big moments. He had, a couple moments that he probably doesn't, want us to remember, but he was really good for us, and he kind of hit the wall at the end of his freshman year. If you look at his numbers were better for the season than they ended up being on the back of the baseball card. And then last year, you got to see it kind of come together, especially down the stretch. He was really, really good for us down the stretch last year.
Third Canadian, I'm really interested in this one. It's Payton McHarg, a transfer from Washburn. He was a star in Division II, lands at Illinois State. Talk a little bit about him and that, and also talk about that transition from Division II to Division I. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about how guys kind of handle that?
Yeah, I mean, when the Division II thing started happening, you started seeing guys like, I was probably more skeptical than just about any coach in the country. I'm like, well, gosh, there had to be a reason they went to Division II. Like, can they really help us? And then we started getting beat by some of these guys in our league. You're like, gosh, that guy just put one in the gap, and it's obviously it made me into a believer. And a guy like Payton McHarg, he's got what I call like zero pulse. Like, I'm not even sure if you put him on the thing, it would even, like, he can play the game, and he's just is like a low heart rate. Obviously, that's the 23U part that we've been, referring to, compared to an 18-year-old. So that's obviously a strength of his. He's old, been there, done that. Doesn't seem to get rattled. I'm sure opening day, he'll have some butterflies, and that heart rate will spike a little bit, but it doesn't seem to do it very often. He's pretty low key, and that's part of his personality as well. But I think that's a huge asset for him. I think he'll probably play right field. He's one of the best right fielders that we've had here. He can throw really well, but it profiles well in right field. He can go get the ball. But where I think we got lucky to get him is, he had a monster junior year. And then he had shoulder surgery going into his senior year, and he didn't he like any good player, he said, I'll just play through it. Well, he got off to a slow start, and he didn't have the same numbers that he did as a junior his senior year. And if you would have flipped those 2 years, people would have saw this uptrend. I bet we don't get him, but we looked back, and we're like, well, you had this year, and then you had the next year. It wasn't a bad year, but it certainly wasn't the same as the All-American year. And I think that was a big reason that we were able to get him is, we're hoping obviously he plays more like the All-American year. And it has, because he had lost some power. Like, I think he hit like 20 plus homers, and he hit 10 the next year. But, we talked to him about it, and he's like, look, I started out, my front shoulder wasn't, right. And I start flying off and all of those things. So, he's certainly healthy now. He's strong. He's gotten into good shape, things like that. So we're looking for a big year out of him. I think the 23-year-old part is huge. And, that's part of like why we've done some of those personality assessments and stuff like that, is to help ease those type of guys into leadership roles, even though they're brand new. He's still 23, right? If you're a 19-year-old on our roster and you've been here 1 year, you're still going to look to the 23-year-old. I don't care if he's new or not. And, 10 games into it, they're all on the, all that stuff is thrown out in the wash, right? So I think that's kind of who he's going to be. He's going to be a quiet leader, and he's just, we couldn't be happier with him at this point.
Those personality assessments, I'm interested in that. What do those look like? Is it like a questionnaire? Is it like a conversation? Take us through a little bit about why and what it looks like.
Well, I think that as you're aware, like college baseball, that you got 35-ish spots, depending upon how many DSAs you have and stuff like that. But with that, you have 20 new guys. So the old days of like, hey, our culture is just going to go like this. We're going to bring in, 6 or 7, 8 freshmen. And then, you're going to keep 6 of them, whatever it is, right, as they go forward. And your culture just keeps kind of going in the same direction. Well, when you return 12, 13 players a year, like seems to be happening everywhere in college baseball, that culture, you're bringing in new players from other people's culture. So you got to kind of identify who they are right away. And it used to be like, the freshmen would have a hard time in the fall, like you're mentioning your freshman fall. At some point, your coach probably got on you, and one of the seniors grabbed you and said, "Hey, Matt, it's all right. That's just how he is when you do what you just did." Well, I don't know if that's there in college baseball anymore. Those guys, there's not a whole lot of players left every year. So that's part of the reason we do it is we need to understand them, but they also need to understand who we are, right? They've signed up to play for us for the next, 56 games, but they don't know a whole lot about us either because there's not a whole lot of people in the program anymore that, there used to be 30 returners, right? And they would sit there and be able to give some of those lessons. And I just not sure that those days are probably, fewer and farther between at this point.
I want to talk a little bit about recruiting in Canada. You've recruited in Canada quite a bit. Obviously, the 3 players you just talked about. McHarg was a transfer, but there's also high school players. How do you kind of go about establishing those relationships with coaches and programs north of the border?
What we've done a good job of is when I got here, we talked about like, you can come see, any of those Canadian teams. They come down to Florida, they come down to Arizona and play. But we actually spent some time on their campus, or their facility, whatever it may be. And, we went up there. Some of our assistant coaches, I've been up there myself, and we went and sat down and watched them play in their own environment. And I think that goes a long ways to building that relationship, because you're not just like, hey, can I get a roster, when they're in Arizona. You know who they are. You've been there. You've kind of understood their culture and, all the things that are going on at, that facility or that program, whatever it may be. And that's usually probably how we got it started the best way, is just going up there. And once you've been up there, you get a phone call every once in a while. Like, hey, remember that one kid you kind of liked? Well, he's popping. And you might be a week in front of, the next team that gets that phone call because you actually took the time and spent the money to go up there and hang out at their place.
For sure. So kind of to close out here, I want to talk a little bit about the upcoming season. How's the roster looking as a whole, and kind of what are your expectations heading into 2026?
Well, the one thing I have learned in the last couple of years is you never know what you're going to have. I think we're returning close to half of our starting lineup, which is good. Some teams are returning, 0. The volatility that will happen in college baseball, I think, is at an all-time high. Last year's team, we lost 4 guys that were 4th and 5th year guys to the portal. So we replaced those guys with some really talented guys that were 1st or 2nd year guys. And with that, we took some lumps early, and then we were pretty good by the end. But, we started out, we were 3-10, the first 13 games. Dug ourselves out of that hole, and, we ended up being fine. So this year we don't have those younger guys. We were able to get some guys like Payton McHarg, who's a 5th year guy. So I would imagine that we don't have that same like deer in headlights out of some of those older guys. The pitching staff seems to be in a good spot. This is kind of that staff that, we've been trying to get. When they went down from 40 players down to, the 34-man roster, some of those bigger schools had to let go some arms and let go some arm strength. So we have arm strength on the mound as well. We have some returners like Matt Donnison, who's done it, our Friday guys back, but we also have some guys that have come in that can really let loose the baseball. So in that aspect, we're lined up, but you never know. It's so hard to tell because everybody else is getting a new portal guy. I don't know if the rest of the league is circling Payton McHarg, like, oh man, Illinois State got this guy, but we'll see. 15 games into it if he's as good as it seems like he is, but everybody else has the same situation, so it's much harder to tell how you're going to be, I think.
Well, anywhere with the Canadian, we're obviously following, and you guys do a great job recruiting here. So we're looking forward to following this season, and thanks again for doing this, Steve.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.